even if we say 95% of kids are beating cancer, 5% are dying.
Right, of course.
Like that. This isn't a thing where a failure to do so is uncomfortable. It's a dead kid.
Welcome to Bald Business, the naked truth in entrepreneurship. Let's begin.
Welcome back to Bald Business. Today, I'm super excited to have Kyle Matthews here with Beat Childhood Cancer. Kyle, thanks for coming in.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's going to be awesome. So, from the very beginning, like always, I just like to start and have people tell us how you got into, I don't even know, do you consider it the medical space, or what kind of space are you considering?
Research, I would say the
More
nonprofit
research.
space and research focused.
Right, because Beat Childhood Cancer is a non-for-profit.
Correct.
So what were you doing before you got into that? What kind of brought you there, and where are we going with it, and what's the hope, the goals, and then we'll kind of get into some other things.
Yeah, definitely. So before I got into the Beat Childhood Cancer, I was running an online forum, a community on the internet teaching people how to develop for iPhones. It was called modmyi.com.
Cool.
Have you ever heard of jailbreaking your iPhone?
Yeah.
So we were the people, our community, that did that. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, there was
awesome.
a lot of fun in that. So it was a very very techie thing. We had 1 million members on there and got about 500,000 page views a day, and that's what I did for years. Is I started with Motorola phones before that, back in the days of the Motorola Razr, and then when the iPhone came out, we called it modding. Other people call it hacking, but working on different phones and doing nifty things to them.
That's awesome.
So I had that.
How long were you doing that for?
10 years.
Okay, cool.
I did that for a decade, maybe even a little bit longer, starting with Motorola and going into the iPhone. And then in 2009, my first son was diagnosed with neuroblastoma cancer. Ezra was his name. And he fought for a year, 13 months of treatment. We actually, if people could see, I have a tattoo here that says 800 days on my arm, and that's exactly how many days Ezra lived. We found out he was diagnosed on the 400th day of his life and died on day 800. So exactly half his life with cancer.
Wow.
And really, when the reason that he died, well, cancer is the reason that he died, but when he relapsed, which a lot of kids with his type of cancer do, they told us, we don't have any options. You think when you go to the doctor, whatever you have, that they consult some magic playbook or database, I guess now, and say, okay, if you have eczema, here's what we do. If you have this, here's what we do. If you have this type of cancer, here's what you do. If you relapse, this is what we do. But the reality is, with lots of diseases, that's not the case. And with the cancer that Ezra had, that's what happened. They told us, we don't have any options. There's nothing left. So we tried to get on a clinical trial. Weren't even exactly sure what that is or was at the time. We didn't come from the medical world. And he wound up dying a few months later. That was in November of 2010. So actually, what's today, the 5th? We're coming up just a few days from the 10-year anniversary of when he died. Yeah. So when that happened, we felt like we had to do something.
Right. Absolutely.
We had been fighting for 13 months with Ezra, trying to beat cancer, and then being told that we just don't have, the medical community has no options. So we thought, okay, we've got to do something. We wanted to start a nonprofit, and our focus really was, which is what our name is now, Beat Childhood Cancer. That's what we wanted to do. Yeah. We've been a part of a lot of groups, or benefited from a lot of groups who do what I call quality of life. They'll, like a Make-A-Wish thing, where they'll introduce you to Steven Stamkos, or take you to Disney or Paris or something. And I think those are important and good, but they're also well done already, and none of that added an hour to my son's life. Right. And that's the mindset that we took into forming what at the time was called Because of Ezra, and now is called Beat Childhood Cancer Foundation. Was, how can we make sure that no other family ever has this hole in their heart that we have, and no other kid has to be told there's no options.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So now that you're obviously in that, that means I guess how long you've been in it then? Almost a decade then?
Yeah, April was our 10-year anniversary because we actually wound up at one point during the long story, we merged with another organization who's another group that was founded by a parent of a kid with neuroblastoma.
Okay.
And so that organization was founded in April of 2010, which is the date that we hold on to now. Yeah. So actually, this is our 10-year anniversary of being an organization.
So what is obviously the big thing is you want to beat childhood cancer, but how are you doing that? What are things that you're doing to actually help other families and children beat it?
Yeah, we spent the first year really just trying to understand the answer to that question.
Okay.
We did not come from a medical background, my wife and I, and we had kind of this unofficial nurse title, by the time we finished, just by absorbing so much information and walking through a year of treatment alongside Ezra and trying to read everything we could of, what does all this mean?
Right.
So we didn't even really understand how research was done. I think a lot of groups, I see this in the childhood cancer community a lot, will just say, okay, the closest children's hospital to me is X, and so I will raise money and then I will give it to this hospital and say, please put this towards research that towards the kind of cancer my kid had.
Right.
We didn't really know if that was the best thing or not. And so we spent a year basically just going all over the country, trying to talk to anyone doing interesting work, and neuroblastoma was our focus, and it's grown since then, saying, what are you doing? What do we do now? What does the medical community do now? What are the clinical trials that are open? How do we do clinical trials? And how do we push for better options for kids? We found a doctor named Dr. Giselle Scholler out of the University of Vermont at the time. She's now in Charlotte. And she had some really innovative ideas, things that it seemed like most people were just saying, let's try, if we do these chemos now, let's try a little bit more of this one and a little bit less of this one. And they were all very low risk things that they were hoping for a 5% survival chance increase.
Right.
Like a little bit here, a little bit there, but nothing interesting. And Dr. Scholler had these very interesting ideas. And so a couple of other parents whose kids were also fighting cancer came together and said, look, you have to do this. She was young in her career. A lot of times doctors in that place won't do pediatrics because there's not a lot of money in pediatric cancer funding.
Right.
There's not enough kids, so you're never going to have tons of drug to sell to make hundreds of millions. So a lot of times you'll see medical doctors focus on adult oncology, and then when they, quote, retire, then they'll do the pediatric oncology research that they love, but they spend their first 20 years, doing something else. We said, please focus on this. We'll go get the money. We'll figure out how to do it. And then the long story short is we quickly realized that the best way, there's two different ways to do clinical trials. And a clinical trial is just, we have a question, a medical question, and we'd like to answer it. Usually it's, we think this treatment option or modality or whatever would be better than what exists now. So we're going to try it, and hopefully the patients respond better than they usually do.
See something different.
And that's all that it really is. Like we think this drug would help, or more of this, or whatever. And there's a couple of different ways you can do what's called a center of excellence, which is like a St. Jude or some of these hospitals where they may have 75 beds and they open a clinical trial only at their location, and the only way to get on that clinical trial is to physically go there and participate. That's really hard for young parents. A lot of times parents who their kid has cancer, they're in their 20s, 30s, they're not super far in their career, so it's often harder for them to just pick up and leave for 13 months or say, I just have money sitting aside where I don't have to work.
Of course,
or,
of course.
All of these things are difficult. So the other model is what's called a consortium. You basically have one lab that creates the clinical trials, the design of them. Here's how much of X drug you give at X interval, and you scan whatever. And any of the hospitals who enter this consortium can offer those clinical trials at their hospital. So that's what we did. And the very long story short is that there are now 50 hospitals that are involved in that research consortium, including St. Joe's here in Tampa, and Arnold Palmer in Orlando. There's a few different ones in our area.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so now there's 50 hospitals that kids can participate in the clinical trials that we're funding and driving.
That's really great.
Yeah.
So what are some of the, I guess, improvements in treatment that you've been, I mean, obviously you've been a decade now. I mean, you've had to have seen positive things, right?
Yeah, we have.
Awesome.
You would hope so.
Awesome.
If not, it would be, what if I said, no, it's just nothing's really working.
That would just be like,
totally donate.
That'd be a lot of work for a lot of stress, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's been really encouraging.
Good.
We've helped to launch 19 different clinical trials in that 10-year period. We do that very rapidly. The standard for the industry can be anywhere from 4 to 6 years to get a clinical trial open. We usually do that under 12 months.
Oh, that's
so we
awesome.
can very quickly roll out new trials. One of the ones that we've been most excited about, we have two areas we're really excited in. One is this drug called DFMO, which specifically for neuroblastoma, which is what Ezra had, we hope it's stopping kids from relapsing. There's one of the big problems with that cancer is we can get kids, we being the medical community, can get kids to remission where there's no evidence of cancer anymore. But then over half of them are relapsing, and there's no known cure for relapse. So
do they know why they relapse?
Not necessarily.
No. Okay.
Yeah, that's another thing that is being looked at, but we don't really know. So our thought was if we can stop that relapse from happening, then we have a huge chance of survival for these kids. It really improves. So that's what we focused on with this drug DFMO, which we're hoping to get FDA approval sometime in the next 12 months. It's been a long process, and that will actually be only the 5th oncology drug approved first for pediatrics.
Wow.
Ever.
Wow,
Not
that's
like in the last
really
10 years.
cool.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen. So that would be a huge win. And the kids on that, we're seeing 5-year survival rates over 90%, which is much higher than the 60 to 70 when we started doing this. So it's
almost
a
double.
win.
I mean, really?
Yeah, it's a big win.
That's awesome.
So that's been really amazing. And then the other focus that we have is something called precision medicine, which uses technology where basically we take a sample of a kid's tumor and we run it through some algorithms and look at the genes, the genomic material, to see what's upregulated and downregulated. And then we already know from all the FDA approved drugs that some of them work on these genes being up or down regulated. So we go, okay, what if we treated this kid's tumor with this osteoporosis drug that we know hits these specific markers? And what if that helped make this kid's tumor go away? And we've seen that actually working.
Wow.
And so that's a thing that we're really focusing on over the next 10 years, because the goal of that would be, what everyone hopes to do, which is you give a agent, a target, a drug to a kid that only treats their cancer, not their whole body.
Right.
The problem with chemo, a lot of people don't realize this, when you see like cancer patients that have like sunken eyes, their heads bald, it's not a side effect of their cancer.
Yeah.
It's a side effect of the chemo.
Yeah, that stuff's nasty.
Poison.
Yeah.
So the idea is, well, let's stop giving kids, in our case, these drugs that just destroy their whole body, hoping the cancer will take it up faster, because that's what cancer does, and try to find things that are targeted specifically for this child's tumor.
Wow.
And we've actually found a really interesting thing is, even within different, you think it's the same type of cancer, neuroblastomas, let's talk about, since that's what Ezra had. They're a little bit different when you actually look at it on that genomic level.
Wow, okay.
So, and that kind of gives us an idea of why you would give the same cancer type the same chemos, and 60% of the kids would respond and 40% wouldn't.
Right.
And the thought was, well, why is this not happening with these kids if it's the same cancer? And we're actually seeing these little differences in the mutations, which will hopefully also help us I'm not a doctor, so the medical community
of course. Yeah.
will help understand and treat these things a little bit more targeted and personalized.
So, yeah, it's like it's almost like a personalized approach to cure, which is, I mean, being in the fitness industry, personally, personalized approaches to any fix is really the best.
Exactly.
It's just nothing's a one size fits all.
Right.
So there's obviously some questions I want to get to about the journey and the struggle and the ups and downs of that. But before we get into that, have you had, and maybe you're not at liberty to speak about it or you don't want to talk about it, but have you had any pushback from, say, like the big pharma area in not just normal prescriptions for everybody? Because I feel like that in general that's seems to be an issue. So is that something you've had to deal with or not really?
Pharma's interesting. So the thing with pediatric cancer is in the U.S. there are about 15 to 16,000 kids a year that get all types of cancer total.
Okay.
So there's really no, like we talked about earlier, there's no money in that for drug companies.
Got it. That makes sense.
You're going to have millions if you look at breast cancer or some of the adult cancers. And so it's really hard for drug companies to actually make money in the pediatric space.
So there's really you don't get the issues really.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff. There's been lots of people from the childhood cancer community trying to figure out, are there ways from like a policy standpoint to encourage these drug companies to do more in the pediatric space, because they have huge amounts of resources, not just from a money standpoint, but a wealth of information and really smart people who, if they were incentivized to focus on pediatrics, probably could come up with some interesting things. Yeah. And especially with this personalized approach, when we see those genomic markers, and what we do now is we use these already FDA-approved drugs that we're now, as a community, understanding better how they work and go, wow, this should work with this kid's cancer. Mm-hmm. Well, that only works if there's a drug that works on those markers. Mm-hmm. The thing is, there's a lot where we go, okay, there's not really a drug that would focus on this. And so in those cases, big pharma may have some drug that they just never pursued on a shelf somewhere that actually works for this.
Gotcha.
But if the community doesn't even know what those are, they don't even know to ask for it. Mm-hmm. You don't know what's in X drug company's back shelf.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
And so there's a lot of conversation around that. We actually had a very cool story, which could be an entire podcast, but there was a drug company who was manufacturing that DFMO drug for us. And when they saw the results started coming back encouraging, they essentially told us that they were no longer going to provide us with the drug, sell the drug to us. They were going to reopen the trial in their name, and they had their own reasons for that. And this whole thing happened, and actually there's a really incredible 5-part Boston Globe series on it.
Okay.
That anyone can look up at globe.com/will.
Okay.
And it delves into that whole story of what happened, and it wound up being another cancer parent who started a drug company in order to ensure that we would have continued access to this, and set that up actually so that if FDA approval happened, funds from the sale of that drug at FDA approval would actually continue to benefit the research that we're doing. So it's a really incredible story and a fun little foray into how pharma can interact with research.
It's unfortunate though that exists.
It is, and it was very stressful. There was moments where, we weren't sure if we were going to be able to have drug for kids who were taking that drug at the time. We had letters prepared we were going to send out.
That is wild to me. Like the fact that that's even okay is just wild to me.
It was really tense for a while.
I bet.
And that all happened in...
Stressful.
I don't know. It's been 4 or 5 years now. But the article is incredible, and it takes about... There's an audio version too that takes about an hour, but it's a great story.
So you said it was just one more time, globe.com/will.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, we'll check that out for sure. So that kind of leads me into some of the other parts of the conversation, which is being in business is hard enough, right? Being in nonprofit work is probably even harder. I can imagine.
It's difficult.
And you just mentioned one of the major stressors that's come up, but is there another time or other things that you can think of that come to mind that have really been like hard, and how did you overcome them? And you don't have to obviously talk about all of them, but maybe one or two.
Yeah, constantly.
Okay.
It is always difficult. I mean, not even... So to start, obviously, the entire time, every interaction that I have, I talk about my son dying.
That's true.
I literally walk into every room when I ask people to support or talk about what we do, and I have to talk about, my reason that I'm here, which is Ezra being 800 days, 2 years old, and dying of cancer.
It's like ripping the wound open every time.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a decade of me constantly doing that, and I am always encouraged and motivated by the good things that we're seeing, and at the same time reminded of my own loss. And there's so many kids along the way that even if we say 95% of kids are beating cancer, 5% are dying.
Right, of course.
Like that. This isn't a thing where a failure to do so is uncomfortable. It's a dead kid. That's what's happening. And so there's a lot of weight that we carry in it. So from an emotional side, it's very
taxing.
Difficult. Yeah, exactly. But there have been a ton of practical struggles too. I mean, before I went full-time in the nonprofit world, I was a business owner, and so when I met with people, there was always some kind of exchange of value. Like I don't know. I'm giving you money and you're giving me a service.
Yeah.
Or
it's like if someone came in and signed up for training or whatever.
Right,
like we're giving them training, and
there's this like very obvious what each of us get out of this transaction. And I noticed a very real shift when I was full-time in the nonprofit world of, okay, now I'm essentially asking for a favor. I don't view it that way, because I think what you do from a philanthropic standpoint is kind of the mark that you leave on the world. And
absolutely.
If you have an excess in your life, I almost feel like there's a responsibility. I do feel like there's a responsibility to do something.
I agree.
It doesn't have to be help kids beat cancer, but you should do something. And so I feel like, okay, it's not a null transaction.
Right.
We're bringing a legacy that you can have in the world, a philanthropic impact. You can see these kids who are alive now because you gave $100 a month or a $10,000 gift or $5 in the bucket at some event. All of these things add up to what we are doing. But there was definitely a shift that I noticed when people,
sure.
They just kind of like, oh, well, this is what I'm doing for you. And in some instances, that's true. So that was another thing to overcome as well, is how do I... It feels weird, and so how do I approach that and talk about it?
I think I agree with what you said, but I can imagine how hard that is, because one of the things I was thinking is you did this whole other thing for 10 years, which, you get used to this flow, right? And it kind of reminds me a little bit of, it's not the same, obviously, because we're in the same industry, but we moved here from Indy. We sold everything and moved here and started at zero, right? So I know a little bit of what that feels like. I can only imagine how much crazier it is when you go from straight business mind to doing that to 100% nonprofit. What was the I guess from the time that you were like, yeah, I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to start nonprofit, was it a very gradual thing, or was it just like you cut it off?
6 years.
6 years. Okay, so it's gradual.
We started the nonprofit in December of 2010. The Because of Ezra one, and then eventually we merged. But Robin and I, my wife, started that nonprofit in December of 2010 and did it out of our margin of time until June of 2016. And at that point, it had gotten to a point where either someone needed to be paid to do it, regardless, someone needed to be paid to do it.
Right.
So we either needed to hire someone, or I needed to figure out a way to transition out of what I was doing to this. It was, those 6 years were really amazing and difficult. It was just, I'm doing two things almost full time. And I don't know if we really thought when we started, you can actually beat cancer.
Right.
You know, I mean, I think it's one of those things everyone always talks about. Oh, well, it's not rocket science, or it's not curing cancer. It's like these two big
giant weights.
And now we're going to Mars, and we are beating cancer. But we started to realize after a few years, this isn't magic. You actually can, you being humanity, the scientific community, we can just pour attention, time, and money into a thing like cancer and beat it. We've done it before. There are several other cancers that have these 98, 99% survival rates because we spent a lot of time and money on them to perfect our understanding and how we treat them. And we started to see within those 6 years, oh my gosh, this could work in childhood cancers as well, and we're seeing it work.
That's awesome.
So it got to this point where if we were going to be able to continue funding and growing it, I couldn't do it on my 25, 30 hours,
of course,
sometimes more than that a week, where I'm also working a full-time job.
Of course.
And it's like, this is insane. You know, I would like to see my wife and son sometimes. So I quit my technology company. I sold it. It was not exactly the right time to do that, but we got a little bit of money.
Yeah.
And went full-time in the nonprofit world. It was a significant life change for us. The way that we lived looked different. The way that we, the amount of money we had, everything changed in that moment. But it was all the best parts of my day were in the childhood cancer community and world, which feels strange to say, but it's true. I mean, the impact that I was having, the conversations we were having, it was important and necessary to do. That's
awesome. No, I think that's great. So what do you feel like is something that you do consistently well that keeps you moving forward? So like a lot of people have like, they do like a morning routine, or they have, something that they like. For me, like I work out consistently, like that just helps, right? What is something that you feel like you do on a regular basis that just keeps you moving toward that goal?
I think planning the day and reflection on the day are two very big ones for me. So we don't have an office. We now have 4 employees, and those are spread out across the country. But for a while, it was just myself, and so there's a lot of, you have to be motivated and on top of your scheduling and how you do things in order to succeed at the day, because there's nobody else involved.
Right.
So for me, I'm very structured on the way that I attack each day. So I have, my kind of morning moment where I just have even if it's 5 minutes of, okay, what is important for today? What do I want to get done for today? And then at the end of every single day, I do that as well, not just from a business or professional life standpoint, but from a personal life standpoint. And sometimes it takes 30 seconds, but sometimes it's an hour, where I kind of just think, all right, of what happened today, what things made me feel good or bad, and what are ways that I should adjust my response to those situations next time to make it better.
That's good.
And that's something I've done for, almost 20 years now, maybe 15 years, that really has been a help to me in just saying, okay, next time this comes up, here's how we do things differently.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. So what do you feel like, because obviously people listening, I feel like I've talked to a lot of people who are like, I want to start a nonprofit, or I have a nonprofit. I was actually just talking to somebody last week that they have a nonprofit in the fitness space, and they're really struggling right now. So what is something that you would say to someone who's maybe thinking about starting a nonprofit, or maybe struggling in the nonprofit world, that would maybe be advice for them to help keep them moving?
I would say first, that's good. I think that's the first thing to understand, is if you have that mindset, it is probably because there is some injustice in the world that you would like to see changed.
Got it.
Whether that's not enough people having access to fitness, or kids aren't beating cancer, or racism or whatever it may be, people don't have enough food near them, whatever it is, there's something that you see that you feel like you want to make better. That's a good thing. So I say, whatever that initial feeling is, please make sure that you're continuing on that.
Remind yourself of that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the question of whether or not you should start a nonprofit is a separate thing. I think it's important to remember that a nonprofit is at its core a business, you know, and I don't mean that it's to generate profit, but it needs to be run well. It needs to, you know, there are regulations, there are accountants, there are things that you have to do with the IRS. You know, you have to interact with the people around you in a professional way, the people that support you. There's all of this, all of the things that come with running a business exist in the nonprofit space.
Right.
And sometimes it's even harder because
I'm sure
you don't just have a bunch of money pouring in. You know, it's not that every business is like that, but there's a little more leeway on a business than there is on a nonprofit. And so I would say make sure that you have your ducks in a row. Just saying there are a lot of homeless people in my neighborhood and I think I can help them is not the right way to then start a nonprofit. You really need to understand, if you see an issue, how are you going to make it better? What is, like, specifically, what is it that you will do? If you say, I want to start a nonprofit, tell me in the first 6 months, what's going to happen? What are you going to do to make things better in the place you're trying to? And then the other thing along that line is, which is sometimes hard from a pride standpoint, usually the people who want to start something are people that have kind of this, not in a negative way, but a pride in, like, I can do this. You know, they have some belief, or I can put people around me who can do this. So it's important to also look and think, are people already doing this? You know? And that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it. There's obviously a lot of people in the childhood cancer space, you know, there's tons of organizations, but you have to look at that and say, if there's someone doing it the exact way I think it should be done, I should probably go and partner with them in some way. Whether it's, can I work for you, or can I somehow support you, or, you know, can I go raise $50,000 that you can pay me so that I can, you know, whatever it may be. If there is a way for you to join someone who's already doing it the way you feel it should be done, that's the best thing.
Got it.
If you look and see people aren't doing it the way that I think it should be, then write down somewhere very specifically what it is about those people that is not the way you think it should be, because that guides you on that first principle of how should I approach it. I think I think millions, I'm just saying this number off the top of my head, so maybe not true, but there are a lot of nonprofits in the United States of America, and a lot of them do essentially nothing. Because people start them and then they realize, well, I thought people were just going to, like, kind of write me checks because I'm doing a good thing, and that it would be really easy to do this good thing. But it's not super easy. It's really hard to just ask people for money. If it's the kind of nonprofit that's funded from public support, it's really hard, you know. So I think just that.
There's sales pitching all the time, like, except again, they're not getting anything from that.
From like a tangible way. So that's, that's difficult. Obviously, there's, like, some people it's grants or federal funding, so there's different ways. But at the core of it, you're trying to convince someone else that what you are doing is good enough for them to pay for it, and that's that can be difficult.
No, I think that's great advice, honestly, because I mean, like you said, and I believe a lot of things are comparable to business, just in general. Like, life could be like, if you're not managing your home life well, it's, you know, you're going to be messy. So I think that's great advice. In this process, have you ever wanted to quit?
Yeah, there's definitely times.
We all want to, right?
Yeah,
at some point. There's
definitely times where you go, what would it look like if I was doing something else? And that's mostly because it can be hard. There are these difficult things, and for me, I mean, the emotional side is really tough to carry, you know. Just like the other day, I had a conversation with my wife about, are there people who wake up and they go to work every day and then they come home and it's not like tearing their heart apart all the time, you know?
Like, I mean, that's
can't imagine
not
exactly
funny,
what that
but
right, exactly. Yeah, it's not funny, but it's like this thing that it's just always, you know, if we fail at what we are doing, kids die.
Mm.
And that is a heavy weight. Now, I also feel at the same time that it's exactly why I have to be here, you know, because I can help, and the team that we've assembled, the supporters that we have, the people around us are making a difference, and I'm just proud to be on that team, and it is worth it. It's absolutely worth it. But yeah, sometimes
so do you think that, because that kind of leads me to my next question, so is that really what keeps you going, is just knowing like that you are making strides, and you are, because I mean obviously people want to quit all the time, right? And
Sure.
some people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously you just got to figure out how to get back up and go again. But what do you think keeps you going?
Yeah, for me, it's definitely that. I mean, that what we are doing is working.
Yeah.
We do a big, we participate in a big road race in Cape Cod, and it's this like 45-year-old race where the only way to get in is if you're a legal resident of Falmouth, Massachusetts.
Oh my goodness.
Or you run with a nonprofit.
Okay.
So it's very kind of tough to get in. There's all these nonprofits you run with. And we have one of the larger teams, usually like in the top 5 teams.
That's awesome.
And we raise a bunch of money there, and it's a great weekend down the Cape, you know, and it's a lot of fun. But when we finish, because we'll have 200, 150 runners, when we finish, we'll have this cookout afterwards. We kind of rent out the fairgrounds. We'll have 300, 400, 500 people there because it's the runners and their families. And we just have, you know, burgers and dogs and live music and ice cream for the kids and blow up things, and it's a lot of fun. But around the inside of the building, we put these pictures up of kids who are participating in some of our clinical trials, kids that we know. And we've been doing this, I don't know, 8 years now.
Okay, wow.
And the first few years, we would get ready for that, and we'd pull out all the posters and realize that most of these kids were not here anymore. They died. And it was just like this, you know, gut punch, right? Because these are people that we know their families. We spend time with these parents. We probably still spend time with their parents, even after they've lost, and we knew the kids. And it's just like, it breaks your heart. And in the last several years, we've started to see they're all still here.
That's awesome.
You know, we pull out the posters, and it's like, we can just, every one of these kids is still here.
Yeah.
And that right there is like, okay, I have
powerful.
to keep doing this, because you look at that and you go, what? And you think, and my wife says this all the time, what would we, like, how thankful would we be to the person who was pouring their time in that came up with something so Ezra was still here? You know, I mean, what would we give up in order to have that?
Right.
A lot. And if we, myself, Robin, the team that we have on the Beach Childhood Cancer Foundation, if we can give that to a kid,
Yeah.
you know, why shouldn't we?
Yeah. Do you feel like that you were made to do this?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know if we were made to do anything. I think that I think we come across things that feel right.
Yeah.
I think you know, maybe Liam Neeson, like, I was given a unique set of skills. That I think there are things that, you know, I can see kind of the path of my life to where I was good at this. You know, like, I've had my own business for many years, so I understood like how to start something, the beginnings of it, you know, navigating, I don't know, state websites and how to set up an LLC, all those kind of things.
All the nonsense.
You know, the basic little things.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something within that. Yeah, but I don't know if I think I was made for this, because I think, and the reason I would be hesitant is because I think then it says, well, so what if you weren't? You know, like, does that mean that maybe someone who has a hankering to do something shouldn't because maybe they weren't made for it? You know, I think sometimes you just find yourself in a place where you have an opportunity to do something, and you do it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that, because I think that I think that we are given, like you said, maybe a stronger skill set than someone else in something, but that doesn't mean it's limited to one thing or another. So
Right.
I agree with that statement. So you and your wife have a little coffee shop too, right?
We do.
Let's talk about that, because I wanna like, you know, when did that come about and kind of what drives that? You guys, I mean, it looks really cool. I haven't been over there yet. Obviously, it's a little farther away, but you know, if anybody listening is over in the St. Pete area or north of there, I think it is.
Yeah, Newport Richey.
You know, definitely want to promote that too. So, how did you guys get into that? What was the purpose behind that? Just something fun, something different?
It's really Robin's thing. I mean, when I met her, she was working at a coffee stand in Washington State, about 45 minutes north of Seattle. So we're both Pacific Northwesterners, and in the little town that we grew up, it's a larger town now, but Marysville, Washington, there were just hundreds of these little, it's like a Home Depot shed basically in Washington with a window on each side, and they, you know, an espresso machine and somebody inside there. And we grew up getting coffee that way. Okay. And so we were just kind of waiting for someone to do that here, and no one had, and we've been in Tampa now since 05 or 06, so you know, 15 years. We've been here a while, and just said, okay, no one's gonna do it. And Robin hadn't worked outside the house for a decade, almost. Our son Charlie, who's in the other room, is he has mild cerebral palsy. Okay. He was born in the NICU, spent 7 months in the NICU. Oh, wow. And had all of these extra issues that just really pulled on her heavily from someone had to be there. And luckily I worked from home, so I was able to help, but she took a huge amount of the responsibility around Charlie. And then as he grew, he had more and more independence. And so it's really been 3 or 4 years now that she was thinking, I want something to do, but you know, she hasn't worked for the long time. And at the time she was early 20s, so she didn't really have, you know, like, I don't want to just go get a minimum wage job. Right. She's like, I want to do something interesting. And so she said, we want to do this coffee thing. She'd wanted to do it for years and years, and it had kind of just been sometime. Yeah. And a few years ago when it really looked like Charlie didn't need us as much. Yeah. Maybe we should do it. So the password for, I maybe shouldn't put this on recording, but the password for our banking for a while had 2016 in it, because that's when we first started looking at it, and it was like this ongoing joke of, it's taken now 3 years for us to get started because it took so long, and it just opened in March of this year. March 9th was the first day. She's actually there right now.
That's awesome.
It's been growing really well. She's loving it, and I enjoy it too. Yeah. It's fun to go out and get, quote, free coffee. Yeah.
What's the hope there? Are you guys gonna open up a couple, or is it
definitely? Yeah. So she's got some lease negotiations with a couple other people that locations that are looking at now. So it's something that she wants to grow, and I think it would be cool for Charlie to be able to take that over, you know, at some point. That's awesome. That's what Robin always says. Yeah. You know, this could be Charlie's thing. So
yeah. No, I love it.
It's a lot of fun. And we have an incredible crew out there.
They look like they're a lot of fun. I mean, I see them on social media all the time, so they look like they're a lot of fun.
Yeah, we got best customer service in Best of the Bay, which is, you know, this regional thing here in Tampa. Yeah. It's good. The crew is amazing. That's Everybody just has a lot of fun in there. And I think that's when people come through, the majority of the feedback is actually about how great the people are instead of how good the coffee is. They say that too. It's good coffee. But, you know, everyone seems to really enjoy the people. And so that, I think, has been the most fun part of it. Robin is like a mother duck, you know. She gets to... It's like another family. Yeah. And it's a really cool feeling.
That's awesome. So, last couple things. Where can people learn more about Beat Childhood Cancer? And then what do you need? Obviously, probably funding. I'm sure nonprofits always need funding. But are there other things that you need, or that, you know, if someone was really interested in helping out, that they could do?
Definitely. I mean, we always have needs. We're a nonprofit, and we love when people care about what we're doing and want to get involved. Our social media or our website is always the best place to follow along to get more information. So it's beatcc.org, Beat Childhood Cancer.
Beatcc.org. Okay.
Yep. So beatcc.org, or on Instagram and Facebook is where we're most active, and it's just Beat Childhood Cancer.
Okay.
So those places are the best to connect with us and find out a little bit more about what we do. We publish a ton of videos on Facebook of different families and things about the childhood cancer world, things that we're doing. And we usually have two biggest needs. Obviously, money is the number one thing. What we do is research, and the only way to drive that forward is with dollars. So that is the main thing that we do. And if people can't, honestly, a $5 monthly thing is important. A monthly donation of $5. It matters to us. So those kind of things really are important. And then just telling the story is almost as important, because that usually leads to funding. I think most people either one, think childhood cancer is already taken care of because there's a group in Tennessee that has a ton of advertising, and they go, oh, St. Jude, they got it covered.
Got it, yeah.
It's not the truth. That hospital is great at some different cancers, but they do not focus on everything, and there's a wealth of research that's happening across really the world that also needs funding. There are a lot of cancers where we are losing our kids still. And that is a genuine, real need that can be affected today. And so sharing a video that we make, talking about that, just telling your friend, I listened to this podcast and I heard about, have you heard of Beat Childhood Cancer Foundation? You should look them up. Those kind of things are really important. Yeah, so I think that is probably the two big things: donate or share. Share, awesome. I love it. Okay, well, Kyle, thanks again for coming. This was awesome, and hope to help you spread the word and help out any way that we can. And just thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. I love any opportunity to be able to talk about what we're doing, and I was really grateful to get the email from you to come in and share, and this has been fun. So thank you.